Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Amanda.
and we are serving up.
All that jam. A lighthearted look at the weekend jam bands.
Where we break down the jam scene's biggest stories,
Talk new bands
upcoming tours.
and show reviews. A little laughing, some hot takes, and an always positive message for the community.
January 30th, 2023.
Welcome back to All That Jam. We're approaching the first week in February, and we have a lot going on. We have our interview with Jimmy Montague coming up, which I'm so excited for. Amanda and I are going to be able to get into a lot of the topics and issues we've touched on before. We have the top three stories, which again is going to be throwback. I think all three of them, Amanda, right?
That's right.
And we're going back with that. And we also, I guess we're going to start off by Bob Weir was in New York this weekend. Thursday night, sat in with J Rad on Jack Straw and Music. And then last night, apparently there was a private party at the Brooklyn Bowl. And Bobby sat in with Dave Matthews. Dave Matthews came out and played You and Me. And then Weir and Warren Haynes, which he's back. I'm glad to see that he's healthy and back on stage. Did The Maker, Imagine, Come Together, and then Satisfaction. So it was a little 4-song mini set with Weir, Warren, and Dave Matthews. How's that grab you?
So say that's pretty awesome. I mean, it's not often you get to see giants like that together, and that sounds like it would probably be a really good time.
At the Brooklyn Bowl, too, which is so tiny.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's a cool spot.
yes. So that's simply fantastic. Anything exciting for you this week?
Got out on Thursday to see one of our local super groups, Death by Dub. It's Motet, Dopapod, Break Science, who's got kind of a rotating series of members from different bands, Thievery Corporation. And they played at Ophelia's Electric Soapbox, which, if you don't know or you haven't been there, is this really awesome kind of three-story venue. And they basically do dinner shows. So free entry, grab some food. Food's amazing. It's a really good time.
Last week you and I had a busy week. We talked to Sponge, which is an up and coming band. We dropped a little thing about they're doing their first tour of multiple venues up and down the West Coast there. We had Scott Sherrard from Little Feat. And then the next hour, we talked to Alan Evans from Soul Live, which was just crazy. And then on Friday, we talked to RJ from over at Osiris.
I don't know if you had picked this up. I was trying not to laugh because Scott would have had no idea why I found this amusing. But Scott mentioned Soul Live during his chat with us, and I'm thinking, what are the odds that
Right.
that you're? He was talking just about some of the great things that they've done in their history, and wouldn't you know it, we've got Mr. Soul Live coming up in like 10 minutes.
He knew so many just connections. It's fascinating. You'll have to listen. We'll get the whole interviews out, but sooner than later we'll see clips of it as things come up. Alan mentioned that the Blue Note this summer there's going to be a little Soul Live residency, and we talked a little bit about which we're going to get into with Jimmy about not touring and is it important? Can you survive without touring? But before that, let's hit those top three stories of the week.
The top three stories of the week.
So, like you mentioned, Kevin, the stories this week are all either follow ups to things that we've talked about. And I think also they all are on the theme of like taking it to the man or the man taking it to us still. So let's talk about those. The first, this concerns something that we had talked about a while back, MSG Entertainment. There was an adverse attorney policy we had chatted a little bit about, if you remember, that was aimed at trying to prevent entry to some attorneys that maybe had dealings that MSG didn't like. Well, just late last week, the MSG Entertainment CEO, James Dolan, pretty much doubled down on this policy. So let me just share a little bit about this. It hit back at politicians and critics who have come out in opposition. of what is essentially trying to use different kinds of technology to keep people out of the venue that they don't want, right? For reasons that are, in my opinion, pretty personal and have nothing to do with whether the actual fan should be allowed in or not. So they characterize the small percentage of attendees banned from concerts and sporting events as ambulance chasers and money grabbers whose business is motivated by self-promotion, and they go on, and who capitalize on the misfortune of others. Wow, that's harsh.
Wow. So when something happens and you're hurt at his venue, their misfortune shouldn't have any money attached to it or anything to make it better.
That's right. I mean, they made sure to clarify that their policy only applies, quote unquote, to attorneys representing ticket scalpers, personal injury claims, and class action litigations, which, guess what? All of those definitely connect back to MSG Entertainment in one way or another at some point in time. So looks like that isn't going to be changing anytime soon. But wow, that's a little juicy, don't you think?
I saw about that and that he was doubling down on everything, on whatever interview he did. Another rich guy who's you know. All right. What you got for number two?
You don't have to think for that, but I think, yeah, the sigh says it all. All right. So next story, I think I tried to put the more positive one in the middle, maybe. So the Ineffable Music Group has very recently cut all artist merch fees at its venues, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are, following Lawrence Senate testimony. Now, I'm pretty sure that we've touched on merch fees and just things like that here and there. But in response to the testimony of the artist Lawrence, band leader Clyde Lawrence, during a hearing last week by the Senate committee, basically announced that they're going to stop charging artist merch sales fees at 10 different venues effective immediately. So not something that's going to happen, 5 years from now. So let me just run down a few of these. There are venues that we all know. Santa Cruz, California, the Catalyst is one of them. Ventura Music Hall. Let's see, the Fremont Theater, Felton Music Hall, which I love. These are a lot of California venues, but not entirely. In Nantucket, Massachusetts, Chicken Box. They will not take the customary 20% venue cut from touring artists selling merch at their venues anymore.
The thing I found most shocking about his testimony out of everything he said was they charged money for towels. They charged them to have clean towels in the room. I was like, what is that? Are you kidding me? I mean, years ago, I worked at a club. We had the towels there for him. Yeah, it sucked to have to pay to wash all the linens and everything, but it was part of doing business.
That's right. And I think there was a good point made also that, typically their promoter takes that percentage, that 20%. And once they factor in the cost of creating and transporting the merch, that can even become like up to 40% of the bottom line. And so I'm assuming that will make those venues even more appealing. And I'm hoping that as fans, we also remember that when we're going into a venue also. Last one, I'm going to try to explain this. I had to read this article a couple times, but it's also Sunday here. So another kind of legal type of situation around Ticketmaster. I feel like this is going to be just the saga of our age, Kevin. I don't really know where this is going to go. A lot of Taylor Swift fans, I think, were on hand for this. But the Judiciary Committee, responding to just that absolute cluster, right? The sale of Taylor Swift concert tickets, has now officially heard the company apologize. But of course, this is all getting traced back to the industry's lack of competition. Live Nation Entertainment just this week, of course, the giant that owns Ticketmaster, came under attack, I think, in a different way than before during these hearings last Tuesday. Committee members from both parties, calling it a monopoly. 3 hours of this, and I know it's all originating from the Taylor Swift ticket debacle, but there's just a lot of stuff out there that they could get into. So I know that some people at the hearing went so far as to question whether the the companies should be broken up. And so nothing,
I'm fine with that.
I can't imagine how anyone who doesn't directly profit from the system could look at that and say that would not be a good thing. Right.
AT&T survived. They broke AT&T up in what, 80 or 81. It still exists. It just became several. We ended up with Sprint maybe because of it.
Yeah.
I think. I'm not exactly sure what happened. I was 9 at the time. But I mean, you break Ticketmaster up. Yeah, it's wrong for the person who owns the venue to own the booking, to own the promotion, to own the tickets. There's no competition. And if we're good capitalists, let's have some competition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think we all have to remember also just the absolute, the pitiful excuses that are coming from Live Nation, right? That it was an assault from online bots, automated programs. I mean, even these senators are basically like, are you kidding me? But, it's not just even the tickets, too. It's those 300 venues that are owned by Live Nation. There's so much that could be done here, even small pieces, right, to try to break this up.
Yeah. So with that, let's jump into this Jimmy Montague stuff. The first clip we're gonna play, you asked him about the new LP and horns and arranging stuff. If people don't know Jimmy, you should check out Casual Use. It's got a Doobie Brothers meets Elliott Smith meets Steely Dan kind of vibe, and he's really into the studio artifact, the production of a song. So this first question, we got into the horns, and we'll see you on the other side.
I'm curious about, you mentioned the album that you're working on now. Did you do similar things with arrangements? Because I feel like you draw on a lot of different eras and genres of music. I feel like with your arrangements, horns, kind of minimalist drums and backbeat. Is that similar for the one that's coming out, or is there a different feel for
I've
that
always sort of been in love with reading the liner notes of albums and seeing who played what on what, and just really following that sort of almost Wikipedia chain of clicking blue names and ending up in different locations. So I've always liked the idea of having my records feature as many people as possible. But it goes in direct contrast with a sort of limitation I put on myself, which is I like to be the one that does everything. So it's kind of like a hard little battle, but my goal for this one was to relinquish some control from me. So I wrote the songs, but I had a drummer on hire this time, which on Casual Use, I played the drums myself. I gave up a lot more of the solos, and I took on more of the arrangement. So for Casual Use, the horns I worked pretty extensively with my horn player, Matt Nogle and Ben Barnett. And they were instrumental to that process. But for Casual Use, I wanted to relinquish more control to the players, but try and, put myself through the paces of writing the arrangement. So this time the horn parts have been written by me. The string parts have been written by me, but I'm going to let the backing band sort of take over that. But for the most part, similar arrangement styles, similar places of inspiration. I think I tried to branch out a little bit more into a groove rather than focusing on being as loud as possible, which I felt I did in Casual Use. I just wanted everything big, 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 and big. And I've sort of locked that down, and now I'm focused on really achieving a tight arrangement where maybe not everything's in your face, but over time you can sort of pick apart different layers and nuances to it. So I think attention to detail was more the message for this one.
That's a huge progression. I mean, I would think, that idea of when you can get in there and play so much of the instrumental pieces yourself, and you have that vision, turning that over to other people. I mean, that's got to be a challenge to work through that.
Something I've realized in doing, I mean, I've always been around a lot of these players I've went to high school with. A lot of the horn players I grew up playing with, have known for a very long time. I've seen their bands, I've recorded their bands. I know that they're very, very talented, and I can fumble my way through a lot of instruments, but there's something about the people who have dedicated themselves to that individual craft. They're not multi instrumentalists. They are a saxophone player or they are a piano player. And I sort of had a realization, which was, yeah, I wrote this part, but why would I think that I can play this better than someone who is this instrument? So, what I've taken to doing, because I'm also the engineer for these records, is I'll write the part and I'll show it to the player. And then I'll be like, this is the ballpark. You play what you feel within this ballpark, take it where you want to go, and I'll tell you if it's the right direction or not. But more or less, I can't really think of a time where they've played something where I was like, no, not it. So I think really trusting people it's difficult, but it usually leads to a much better experience than having some sort of death grip on some sort of, visualized goal, I guess.
I've discovered that over quarantine that, if you work by yourself, you might work faster, but you don't
Oh,
necessarily work better.
yeah, that's true. You do work much faster if you're by yourself. I am not going to be able to get to these horn arrangements until I can line up a schedule for like 7 different players, and I'm like already going a little insane with waiting, but I know it's going to be worth it.
Kevin, this was such a good conversation that we had with Jimmy. And to be completely honest, I was not very familiar with his music until I started listening right before, we knew we were going to book him. I am so grateful, though, that not only was he able to tell us so much about his recording process, but then we got into this whole question about studio time versus heading out on tour. And for you and me, sometimes it might be hard to think about the fact that an artist may not love going on tour or playing live as much as we might be used to from the bands we listen to. But Jimmy had a lot to say about that, so take a listen.
We need to get you at a festival, and then you can, like, it's a one-shot thing. You bring the band in for the
Right.
festival date and you get in front of 50,000 people or
Right.
20,000 or, what, even if it's 10,000, boom, all of a sudden. And then it opens the door to the next festival. Maybe you're a
Right.
festival
I
band
had
with the big band.
I had the bit thinking that it would be nice to the only shows I ever play would be like the Newport Jazz Festival or the Folk Festival, sorry. Uh, and that would be it. And just once a year play one big show with the band, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it. Because I like shows and they're super, super necessary to getting your music out there. But I kind of hate being at shows. I get exhausted of the whole situation very quickly. I'm much more comfortable in a studio. I have way more fun writing the songs, and after over a decade of playing shows at different levels, I'm not going to say they've all been bad, but like after a decade of playing shows, the compliment of like great set just doesn't mean as much anymore. I'm much more invested in a good album. A good album has always been the coolest thing you can do in music.
I love that honesty. And I actually think that so many musicians would agree with that, but that's not something that they're willing or feel able to say. One of my favorite producers, mixologists, Sola Rosa out of New Zealand, Andrew, same thing. I mean, I chatted with him a couple months ago, and he has to get a backing band. It's him, right? Bringing everybody in. And for him, it's the studio time, it's the albums that he loves. He's not one to really enjoy being on stage, so maybe a couple times a year he'll do that. And I really respect that he's found his place where he's most comfortable and feels really productive. And the rest is just like, if it happens, it happens. That's his take on it.
If I had unlimited time where I didn't have to worry about how often I could get into the studio, I would probably choose more avenues like live music. But like the idea of rehearsing for 2 weeks for one show to play and just have it be that, when I could be spending that time in the studio, it stresses me out beyond belief. If I had more time, maybe, but like even for the most recent tour down to Florida and back, it was like 2 weeks of rehearsals and stuff. And I was like, we play for 30 minutes and then we're done. And then we just wasted 2 weeks of what we could have been working on music to just play for people who were like, that was great. Bye. And like, I know there's something to be said about your audience and giving it to your audience, and the people who support music are not to be, trivialized in that regard. But like, some people seem to just love shows so much and then not even listen to the albums. And that hurts. It hurts so bad.
You were describing jam band fans.
Yeah, but for them, that's like the jam bands know that what they're doing live is for like that's also just as much of the bag. But like for singer songwriters and people who write, the 3-minute song like we were talking about, like we the album is so important to us, and the music is so important, and the recording is the finalized version, the pinnacle of what we're trying to make, that when we see the streaming breakdown and people listen to the first 5 songs almost triple the back half because they don't make it through a full album, and then they're like, when are you playing live? And it's like, just listen to that right there. That's all I want to give you. It's very frustrating for me. I know that there are some people who feel like maybe they like playing shows just as much as they like making an album. So maybe that's all they need. But for me, it's a very frustrating thing to have put so much time into arrangements, into songs, and then have people be like, well, I need to see you live. And it's like, I don't want to be a little performing monkey on a stage. Like, I already did this. I did all this work.
Right.
You need to see me do it. Like,
I hear you.
Do you feel like some of that is because that generally people are less aware of what has to happen, the decisions, the expertise, et cetera, to actually make the album to get to that point? I'm just, with streaming and everything seemingly so accessible, sometimes I just wonder.
I wouldn't go as far as to say maybe they don't appreciate the amount of work that goes into it. I think that might be hating listeners a little too much, but I know what you mean. I think it's just people who don't make music but love music want to see it so bad, and I can't, as that person who makes music, I can't really wrap my head around it, but that's just not my perspective. So the people that don't make music but love music, they just want to see it so bad that the album's out, now I want to see it. And I think that has shortened the window of how long we appreciate a release when it comes out. Because now I'm seeing like from a behind the scenes standpoint, when you're going to put out a record, bands are now doing up to a 3-month PR cycle, usually leading up to the release, if not maybe even a little bit longer. And then you're lucky to get 3 days of actual attention on the record before move on. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very short window for how long people seem to appreciate albums. And the better albums get revisited a year later, a few years later, listened to consistently, and enough, appreciation gets put into it. But like, so many records get like a 2-3 day window, and it's like, either do it live or seal it or make another one.
What I've been saying, what we ask a lot of bands about playing live versus the studio artifact, and how embracing the studio is a different thing. It's just fascinating that he kind of is going against the tide, and I wonder if more artists maybe secretly don't think this in the back of their heads.
Well, and I don't want to say anything specifically about people that we've talked to, but don't you think there's just been this recurring theme about how when everyone was at home during COVID, so many breakthroughs happen artistically in different ways. And so I do wonder sometimes if people might say, wow, that was stressful, but we also were able to get so much out of it.
Right. And some of the best recordings of some bands' careers came out from having COVID and, dealing with all of that. Another thing that happened with COVID was there were a lot of live streams. A lot of bands had their weekly streams or, semi-month. We got into Jimmy a little bit about how indie bands have backing from record labels usually, but emo bands and jam bands don't, and how maybe for him the studio sessions are a compromise. So let's check that out and we'll see you on the other side. Right. Let the band go. Maybe the step towards you letting the band vamp more on the new album will lead you to, all right, I got to just trust the band. They're going to take it. And if there's what do they say about you make a mistake, you do it 3 times and then it's part of the song?
Right. Yeah. I think maybe I'll try a looser attempt with my live sessions. I like doing the live sessions. I feel like that is the best middle ground I've been able to find for me personally, because then I can just pay the people for one day and get them up there. We'll play it. We'll run it a few times. We'll play it. We'll record it. We'll videotape it, and it'll be there in perpetuity. Anyone can watch it, see how we like it. It doesn't feel
That would satiate some of the need to see it created. I mean, you could watch it live when you broadcast it live, or you can go back and watch it later and feel like. I think that's a good middle ground.
That has proven to be the best middle ground for me. And I watch a lot of live sessions for musicians that I like, and I would be more inclined to do that than to go see them. Even if that, like, I know that like everyone in the only frame of reference I have is the DIY emo community, because I'm not really tapped into the indie community, because the indie community is bigger labels, and it's much bigger than the DIY emo scene that we do, even if it doesn't seem like it. But the indie community has big label backing, and there's a lot of doors that need to be opened before you can get to that. So my only frame of reference is the DIY emo community, and the best way that you can support in that scene is to go to shows. The merch sales, going to shows, buying tickets, that it's the only way the bands can make money in that realm. That's not the case for other realms, but it's my only frame of reference. And I feel bad as a person who doesn't go to shows, because then I feel like I'm not supporting my scene. But buying records, I just feel like it may not be the best way, but I think it's like the best way to get a permanence of this band that you love. Like it's a thing. It's tangible to me. I feel like I'm being very honest with my experience with that community. I think it would be a disservice if I didn't tailor it with, there may be some level of jadedness that I feel as a recording artist versus bands that have been very successful live. I think that there are many different ways to support many different artists. And just because live music is not the thing that I'm totally after doesn't remove any merit from bands that are going after that. I have my own issues with fans and audiences and music, and I'm sure every musician feels somewhat differently or somewhat similarly, but as a recording artist, all I've ever cared about is an album.
For everybody out there that's listening, definitely check out Jimmy's music. I think it has a lot of parallels to some segments of the jam band scene, and the songwriting is just fantastic. Want to make sure to remind everybody to like, subscribe, follow, all the things, as I say, every one of those things. And at All That Jam Pod is where you can find us, I think, on every social media platform now, because we did take the bait, and now we have a Facebook page too. Yay. And then, of course, allthatjampod.com. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you can think of, that's where we're at. And Kevin, I do have some audience participation, listener participation stuff for this week. If you want, I can share a little bit.
Yeah, let's check it out.
All right, so I threw a poll up on Instagram, as I like to do, and I asked, does it feel like there's an overabundance of shows and tours being announced for spring and summer, or is this just me? Because I'm completely willing to admit that it's just me. And by and large, over 90% of everyone who responded said it feels like more shows and tours than ever. However, I did hear from a friend of mine who actually works at the Fox Theater. He's in his own band, but he's in venues constantly. And he said, it seems like things are finally back to normal and the industry is overcompensating by having a ridiculously full calendar. So, Dylan, thank you for that. What do you think about that, Kev?
I do feel like that. In January, there was, coming up, including this weekend coming up, next weekend, Disco Biscuits, Pigeons, Mel, Humphreys McGee, Green Sky Bluegrass, plus a bunch of others. Neil Francis is playing Sunday coming up. I mean, there's just so many, and maybe that's overcompensating, and maybe bands are like, we haven't made any money in a while. You know, Spafford is out there just nailing it every night, 4 or 5 nights in a row, and taking names, I must say. If anybody has a chance, check out their YouTube.
Yeah, good energy.
Which is fantastic.
Really, really positive energy coming from them right now.
But yes, I do think that there's too much. I think the 90% is probably right for once.
Here you go. Now, of course, I put an option in my poll that said, I have no idea, Amanda. Why are you asking me? And some people said it's also really difficult to remember back to what things would have been like even 3 or 4 years ago. But it definitely is, volume-wise, just a lot to have to consider. So there you go. If you're feeling that way, you are not alone.
It does seem like a long time ago. All right. So next week, speaking of pigeons playing ping pong, we are going to have our interview with Gator, which was fantastic. He told us about a band with a woman named Natalie Brooke, a little side project that we got into. So that should be fun. And apparently 2 people in pigeons are Ben and Greg are having children.
Oh, congrats.
Yes, which is fantastic. Little pigeons. What do you call a baby pigeon? We'll have to look that up.
We're going to know, because then we can set the tone for what everyone else is going to call them.
Right, exactly. All right, look for us. We're going to drop a couple shorts this week, every Monday. Make sure that you find us. And you got anything else there for us, Amanda?
I would just say to everybody, be on the lookout, because as these tours do ramp up, I want to hear what's happening out there.
Yes, definitely. Follow us and bother us, tag us, and let us know what you're thinking. And remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long. I'll see you soon, Amanda.
Good one, Kev.